All right, the latest news coming in. India today has accessed the inside details of the violent LAC face-off on June 6th. India and China Lieutenant General level talks, after which June 6th to June 12th Chinese army set up camp. On the Indian side, India dismantled Chinese camps in which 2 soldiers were injured. This happened between June 13th and 14th when Chinese army returned at standoff point. June 14th, stone pelted at standoff point in Galwan, and June 15th, India-China clashes near Shyok River. Many Indian soldiers fell into the river after the clashes. I want to connect right now to our consulting editor, Shiv Arul, joining us live. Shiv, will you take us through this chronology?
Preeti, this is, remember, after the Lieutenant Governor talks had actually happened, there was news about a disengagement from both sides. Now, first of all, as we reported, this was a very token disengagement. There was not very much happening. So the Chinese had moved back some of their camps. But at the standoff point, midweek in the week gone by, the Indian Army found that the Chinese had actually come back. They had gone back on their word. They'd come back and set up another temporary encampment, which was completely in violation of the disengagement agreement that they had sort of entered into during the Lieutenant General level talks. As a result of which, the commanding officer, that's Colonel Santosh Babu, along with quite a few soldiers, went to that particular camp unarmed, apparently, to tell them, look, this is not part of the disengagement plan. You're not supposed to be here. And when they reached there, they came under a very heavy and sudden attack. They were unarmed and they came under this extremely heavy attack from the Chinese. Apparently, they were assaulted with stones. They were assaulted with barbed wire wrapped clubs. There were clubs with nails attached to them. Really barbaric stuff. They were attached. The CO was immediately very grievously injured, and a large number of the soldiers who were with him were actually taken captive by the Chinese. That's the information that we have, even though it hasn't been officially put out by the Indian Army just yet. After the CO was removed from the scene and taken back, and we understand he succumbed to his injuries very shortly thereafter because he'd been hit by stones, and it was quite barbaric. There was a lot of blood over there as well. Then a company commander from the same unit went back to that particular area because you had all these jawans who'd been held captive, and once he and his band of men reached the site where this was happening, things escalated even further, and we understand that the casualties were inflicted at this point. There were several, this was happening near a ridge, and it came out of the encampment, Preeti, and many of the soldiers were actually pushed down, a cliff face into the Galwan River, which is a very narrow, fast-moving river, and that's where many of the casualties happened. But many of the casualties that were inflicted on the Chinese also happened at this particular phase of the engagement. It was a major company commander along with a small group of soldiers who went there, vastly outnumbered by the Chinese, who had brought in, more people. There was apparently one place where there was a slightly higher ground to where the clash was happening, and the Chinese had earth-moving equipment, and there was a lot of belligerence there as well in an effort to try and move the earth down into that clash area to push the Indian men, into the Galwan River. So it was an extremely brutal, murderous, very, very bloody, engagement. The entire thing from beginning to end, as I understand it, took about 3 to 4 hours, started in the evening, ended, well after midnight. And the fishing out of bodies took place, in the darkness from the Galwan River. So that's where many of the casualties actually happened. The Indian Army has confirmed 20 dead, Preeti, but we understand that the number could be higher than that. In fact, I'm quite sure the number will have an update by the morning. There are lots of Chinese casualties as well. Lots of numbers doing the rounds, Preeti, but no confirmation and no official word on that just yet.
That's unfortunate, Shiv, because yes, the numbers are going to increase. But, Shiv, you've explained the chronology, the sequence of events to our viewers. Now, could you give us some perspective on where exactly are Chinese soldiers squatting right now? How much more into Indian territory?
Preeti, the disengagement on this particular area, which is Patrol Point 14, has taken place. The disengagement was supposed to involve these particular soldiers who had agreed to disengage, moving their camps out of there. So this camp, which was the bone of contention, was very much on territory that India considers its own. The Galwan Valley as a whole is considered Indian territory. It has never been under dispute before, but the Chinese soldiers who came and squatted there before and was then the topic of this disengagement is precisely why this has happened. Now, as we speak right now, there are still Chinese forces on their side of the of this particular particular engagement zone. But even there are complications, Preeti, because the mobilization has happened in such a large number that the disengagement hasn't happened fully. And I imagine that this extremely violent episode is going to slow things down even further. Now, where is the question of disengagement? The only disengagement that the Indian Army has spoken about in its late night statement today is a disengagement from Patrol Point 14, where the actual violence took place on Monday evening and Monday night. But the larger disengagement from the Galwan River Valley area, that hasn't happened just yet, Preeti.
Well, thank you for joining us, Shiv. How will India react to all of this? Well, it's going to be the toughest night, possibly, many would debate, for the Prime Minister of Narendra Modi being the Prime Minister of India. Tough night. Trial by fire. How will India react to this? Thank you, Shiv, for joining us. Just to elucidate further on what Shiv was just telling you, we put it all on a map. I spoke to our news director, Rahul Kanwal, and this is how he explained it. 20 Indian soldiers martyred. The number could in fact even go up. Even right now, things are escalating at the LAC.
So the information that we have, Preeti, just a few minutes before your show began, I've heard from the army to say that at the Galwan flashpoint, troops have currently disengaged. And I want to use some maps that we've put together with the help of open source experts to explain to your viewers what really happened, Preeti. So this is the Darbuk Daulat Beg Oldie Road. This is called the DSTBO road. It's very crucial because it allows us to have men machines sent to Daulat Beg Oldie, which is in subsector north, which is the one area of Aksai chain which India still controls. So it's very, very strategically significant given that the rest of the Aksai chain plateau was taken by the Chinese in 1962. So what happened, Preeti, is last evening, from our positions on the Indian side of the line of actual control, small verification parties were sent up to the area of Patrol Point 14 to check whether the Chinese had disengaged, because in the conversations that were happening between the generals and brigadiers of the Indian and Chinese armies, they had indicated that they would pull back, which essentially means that what's India's expectation? That the Chinese would pull back to their posts. These are the two Chinese posts. They're about 56 kilometers away from the flashpoint. They have a tarred road coming a large distance, and then beyond that they have a kacha sadak or a dirt track which brought them men and machines and their vehicles in. So the army's expectation was that they'd pull back, which is what the Chinese had indicated. But when our verification party went, the Chinese were in a very violent mood, it seemed, almost seeking to provoke, seeking to get into some kind of a confrontation. Now this is what we're learning by speaking to some of the officials who heard accounts from those who were on the ground. Since it's and you come from a military background yourself, a verification party is a very small deployment. We don't know the exact numbers, very small deployment. And the Chinese were present here in big numbers, and they attacked our deployment very aggressively, which is immediately when extra reinforcements were called. And you know that at this time there's a massive build-up. So from the 6th Bihar, extra deployments were sent in, and that's when on a very narrow ledge. Now imagine this as a mountain height. There's a very narrow ledge, and you've got 200 soldiers on both sides having a go at each other. We gave as good as we got, and unfortunately in that some bodies were also, from what we are learning, washed away into the river. In fact, that's the concern that the Chinese had when they called early in the morning at 7:30 a.m. saying that they were apprehending, because the river Galwan actually flows into the Indian side. There's a confluence here in the Shok area. This is the confluence point of the Shok and the Galwan river. They were worried that some of their bodies had actually come towards the Indian side. So when the party went up, they found that the Chinese were there. There was violence, and this went on for several hours. So through the day, efforts were made that the Chinese actually disengage. We're being told that there were heavy fatalities on the Chinese side, but the Chinese government, and remember, you can't really expect any transparency from the Chinese government. They didn't accept that the virus was running loose in their country, that people were dying. They've been completely non-transparent about COVID numbers. You don't expect them. Usually any professional army would accept the kind of losses that happened to them. them. The Chinese are known for not being transparent and for lying through their teeth, and they're not telling us how many people were lost, but we are told that the fatalities are very, very severe on both sides. We also know that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is taking a very direct, moment-by-moment assessment of what's happening. He was locked in conversation with his key man, Home Minister Amit Shah, with the Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, with External Affairs Minister Jaishankar. In fact, Dr. Jaishankar has been apprehensive of the Chinese motives from day one, because he dealt with them as ambassador in China, because he dealt with the Chinese when he was foreign minister. He, from the word go, was the one person in this Cabinet Committee on Security group gathering who was telling the government that you have to wait to see actual disengagement. Don't go by what they say, see what they do. And what's happened, unfortunately, Preeti, and I just want to zoom in closer to be able to show this to you, is that as we came up, the Chinese refusing to back down. At this time, though, I'm told that the Chinese and the Indian Army have disengaged. Now, why is it that they want to stay, Preeti, on these mountain tops? Why is it that even though it's sub-zero temperature, 16,000 feet, which is really just a crazy place for anybody to want to be in, why is it that they want to dominate these heights? That's because of this road, the DSDBO road, which is strategically very significant. And if you're able to dominate the heights, you can take a pot shot at any vehicle that passes through on this road, which, if you remember what happened during the Kargil war, the Pakistani army was sitting on top of the mountain right above the Indian National Highway in Kargil and in Dras. So each time an Indian cavalcade or an Indian vehicle, so much so that a civilian vehicle with journalists would also pass, they take aim at it, which really makes movement very, very restricted. And therefore, whether they do it or not, they want to dominate so that they can threaten our assets. And that is what the Indians don't want. The other problem is that, okay, so you've got this road, we're trying to build extensions from the road to the patrol point, which is a totally legitimate thing to do, because this is the line of actual control, Preeti. And therefore, if along the river we build a road, it's a totally legitimate thing because it's on our side of the border. Just as the Chinese have built roads on their side of the border. Here, you see this, they've got a road going all the way up to very close to patrol point 14. So what's wrong if we build a road here? The Chinese don't like that. And those are the kind of local subterranean issues which are driving this conflict. At this time, we're told, though, that at this point, the two armies have disengaged and pulled back finally.
Quick question there, because you're keeping an eye on all the developments that are taking place. We know the Prime Minister was locked in a meeting with the Defence Minister, with the Home Minister. Now, if you put this in perspective, Rahul, this is going to be the acid test for the Prime Minister, trial by fire of sorts. We have gone ahead, we've owned Uri, we've owned Balakot. How will India react right now? And it's going to be a very tightrope walk diplomatically.
You're absolutely right, Preeti, because in some senses, with the kind of position that then Chief Minister Narendra Modi took when the UPA was in government in 2013 and not showing a resolve to act, that the problem is in Delhi, the problem's not at the border, etc., it kind of pushes him to act tough and send a strong message. Now, the problem is we're in the middle of an economic recession. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. The numbers are surging. India hasn't peaked. So this is really the worst time to get into a military conflict with a neighbor like China. However, this is not what India wanted. We've given peace and diplomacy a chance. And the thinking in the government is, if this is what they want, then so be it. Remember what General Ved Prakash Malik said, who was Chief of the Army Staff during the Kargil war, the army will fight with what it has. And remember, like in this area, where if the Chinese are on top of the mountain heights, they can dominate the road, there are multiple areas along the line of actual control, especially in the Arunachal sector, in the northeast, where the Indian army dominates substantially. And we did a force assessment. You might have seen that, which is a public source, Harvard University review, which looks at the comparison between the Indian army and the Chinese army. We are more than evenly matched. So yes, we took some blows. There were some deaths on our side. There were deaths on the Chinese side as well. The Indian army and the Indian government is very clear. If this is what you want, that's what you'll get. The effort, though, is for better sense to prevail, so that there is a realization in Beijing that this is not what anybody wants in the middle of a pandemic, that two nuclear-armed countries come to blows in this violent fashion. This is not a battle India wants, but if the Chinese won that battle, what we are being told from the government at the highest levels, top ministers have been in touch with us, top government bureaucrats have been briefing us, and they say, if push comes to shove and we need to fight, make absolutely no mistake that we will more than just give the Chinese a bloody nose. Now, it remains to be seen whether Xi Jinping, and remember, Xi Jinping is most certainly aware of what's happening. when the Chinese structure was reorganized, Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, took direct control of the PLA. So nobody else in the Communist Party's Politburo has access to what the PLA is saying. The military commanders report directly to him. And if you see all these areas, and Preeti, if you permit me, if you have a minute, I want to show your viewers what's happening in another sector. Remember, these things can't happen without one thing that happens typically is if there is a new divisional commander, maybe even a new commanding officer of a battalion, he may want to demonstrate to the enemy side that he's arrived, that he's powerful, that he's alert and he's awake, and he wants to dominate them. So he sets the tenure of his command. That happens typically between militaries. But this is much more. Multiple incursions all the way from eastern Ladakh going all the way down to Sikkim. This can't happen at a local military commander level. This is not even at the... You've got 3 commands in India. So you've got the Northern Army Command, you've got the Central Command, the Eastern Command. In China, there's only the Central Military Command in China. There's one command all across our border. There's no way even that commander, theater commander, can take the decision. This is taken in Beijing by Xi Jinping. He fully knows what's happening, and therefore it's really his choice. If you want to poison the relationship between 2 of the most populous countries in the world, and that's the path you want to go, then that's a battle India, from what the government tells us, is ready to fight. They don't want that fight, but if it comes down to that fight, they will give as good as they get.